Hi, hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast. We have no sponsor this episode, but instead are brought to you by Brass Fasteners. Brass Fasteners. Really impressed that they've been around this long. My name is Claire, I'm still your host, and thank you for joining me today. As we start every podcast, I would first like to say that Black Lives Matter, and that I am creating this content on the traditional lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux tribes. We will always start the podcast acknowledging the inequitable landscape and history of the United States, including but never limited to the fact that we are a country built on stolen land and developed on the backs of slaves. Stage Manager Supply Co. is my own attempt to bridge generations of systematic racism and oppression by making stage management arts education much more accessible. Today, I would like to highlight Dig Deep. Dig Deep is a nonprofit organization working to ensure that every American has equitable access to clean, running water forever. 2.2 million Americans still don't have hot and cold running water, a bathtub or shower, or a working flushing toilet. At least 44 million more don't have clean water that's safe to drink. Dig Deep's impact model advances community-led solutions by deploying proven water sanitation and hygiene strategies, develops an evidence base, mobilizes Americans, and builds an ecosystem of change. Personally, Dig Deep has helped family of one of my closest friends on reservations in Arizona, and I am proud to support their work. If you would like to learn more about Dig Deep and donate what you're able, you can find the link to their website in the episode description. 2 disclaimers before I introduce today's guest. Disclaimer number 1. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, that is me, Claire, and the guest, and do not reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, production, organization, employer, or company. Disclaimer number 2. The host does not presume to be any sort of singular voice for stage management or stage managers. The views and opinions expressed by the host are extremely limited to the scope of her own experiences and are being widened each and every day. So now that we have once again grounded our work in the reality of the world around us, let me introduce you to our guest. Our guest today is our first non-stage manager, lighting designer Heather Gilbert. Based out of Chicago, Heather holds her BA from Trinity University in San Antonio and her MFA from the theater school at DePaul University. Some of Heather's most recent resume credits include The Sound Inside, Broadway, directed by David Cromer at Studio 54. Other productions with David Cromer include Our Town in London, following runs in Chicago, New York, LA, Boston, and Kansas City. She designed Miss Blacks for President, directed by Tina Landau at Steppenwolf. She has worked regionally at Studio Theater in DC, the Milwaukee Rep, Actors Theater of Louisville, Huntington Theater, Williamstown, Goodman Theater, and Looking Glass Theater, among many others. She has also served as the head of the lighting program at Columbia College Chicago since 2006, and you know that we stan an arts educator. In 2012, Heather received the 3 Arts Award in Chicago, and this very year, she won the Drama Desk Award for lighting design of a play for The Sound Inside, which is where I met Heather, who, fun fact, wore a crown for the entire tech process. Heather, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm looking, I feel like my tiara should be right behind me. I could wear it right now.
Oh,
Hi.
I should have given you forewarning. I just thought it was going to be so funny.
It's never far away. It's never far away.
Heather, congratulations on your drama desk. I am so proud of you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for everything that you did to be a part of that. So it was great. I had a great team.
You had the best team, and you guys were so fun to work with. How are you holding up during quarantine?
It is okay. It is okay. As I am a teacher, it is, I have that to do. I have a lot to focus on with my students. It would be very hard. I feel for my friends who just had all their shows taken away and don't have their creative outlet. At least I can focus mine on the students and their work. I did some, let's see, what I'm trying to think what I've done to like keep myself feeling creative. I took a drawing class this summer, which is super exciting. I taught this summer on a like a high school institute online. So I was a teacher on that, and I decided I would take the drawing part with them because they had drawing every single day. So I got to do that and bring that back into my life, and I haven't done it in years. So that's got me really excited. I want to try to get back into that practice, although I have not done it so much since. So I need to figure out my routine. I'm sort of in that weird, like in between, like school's about to start and I'll have a new routine, structure. So
yeah, that's interesting. I found that I've also gotten into a lot of like creative things I haven't picked up since I was, I don't know, maybe 13, like cross stitch.
Oh yeah.
When would I love it. I made a Blues Brothers cross stitch. Maybe I'll insert a picture of it. I'm really proud of it.
Nice. I totally want to see it.
It's great. Will you tell us a little bit about your journey to lighting design, how you started out in theater, and what about lighting brings you joy?
Oh my God, everything about it. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. I love light. I actually didn't do theater. Until I got to college. I was a late bloomer in our world to some extent. I for years, so if our friend David Cromer, who we have in common, won an award years ago. He won the MacArthur Genius Grant, which is significantly more lucrative than winning a Drama Desk Award, But so he was being interviewed all the time, all over the place. And I would be around at times, right? So I kept hearing him get asked, did you always know you wanted to be a director? Did you know when you were a kid? And all the time David would say, no, and then he would tell the story of how he like had the games that he played as a child. He's like, I always played make-believe games, and I always, those were kind of stories I liked. And I thought every time I heard him say it, I would just think, David, everybody played those games. I don't know why you think that means you were going to be a director one day. And then at some point it really hit me that everybody didn't play those games. The fact that I played the same kinds of games that he did is because I too was somebody who was prone to this, and I was like, I've realized since then my favorite game to play as a child was Shop, because House didn't have enough ground plan. There were so many more ground plan opportunities in Shop.
Yeah.
So you had to figure out where all the things went. Yeah, and I loved going to the theater, and I think that actually is a big asset still in my work today. That I loved going to see plays so much that I think that makes me still a great audience member, and I still find the magic in being in the theater that I did even when I was little. I think I went through a little bit of a jaded period when I was younger, where I was like, no, now I just make things. But now I really realize that I just like watching actors tell stories. It's the best job in the whole wide world. And I cannot believe I get to do it. Well, I will get to do it again.
Yes.
I'm confident I will get to do it again.
Yes, we will. We need that confidence. Yeah. So did you then get your BA in theater?
I did. So I took a class in my freshman year of college, right when I got to school. It was called, they had really fancy names. That was sort of the trend in academia when I went to college. And every classes were named things like the theater and its world, the world and its theaters. Yes. Right, yes. As opposed to just calling it Introduction to Theater, which is what that class was. And in that class, I had this amazing teacher. We had a 1-year replacement teacher who was in, well, there was a search committee going on. I don't know. I was a freshman. I didn't know any of that stuff was happening. Mm-hmm. And she was awesome. And, we did things. It wasn't just sitting around talking about the plays. We also had to hang lights for one night. We had to go one light hang. We had to do one afternoon in the shop. And now that I'm a professor, I look back and I'm like, that was the cruelest thing to do to TD. To send 20 people who had no idea what the hell they were doing into the shop. Heck they were doing.
You can start, it's fine.
Thank God. So in that class, I not only got my hands on things backstage and realized how much I liked that, right? Because it's really hard to tell that there's that It's not just the actors if you haven't experienced it. But I had never had any interest in acting. That was not that's not who I still don't understand how they do it to this day. I took some classes, I do some things. I even team teach a class where there's performance elements, and I still watch them like this. How?
What are you doing?
It's so amazing. So yeah, which again helps me be better at my job too. The other thing about that class is that I made my best friends from college in that class. I just like half an hour ago was texting with one of my roommates from college who I met in that class. I think 2 of the people on my group text were in that class. So that just sort of like nailed me to the theater. So once I got to college, I didn't do it before college, but once I got to college, I didn't do anything else. And actually, my friend, I went back and forth between lighting and various things, and I did a lot of stage management when I was in college.
Tell us more. Tell me everything.
Tell me more. It's funny. There are things I really like about it, and there are things that are just not my jam. One is having to be responsible for everybody else. I'm not as good at that. I do sort of like the organization level of it, not like you crazy people who are like drooling at the staples. But I mean, I sort of like drool a little bit at, the Office Depot, or I do it a little bit. I do a little of that. I think lighting design is such an organized art form as well. Like there's so much putting together a puzzle, and then we number everything. So you have to keep super organized to know what numbers people are talking about all the time. And I think that that part of me really sort of was interested in stage management. I like rehearsals. I like being in rehearsal probably more than a lot of designers. Although I think more designers like being in rehearsal than people assume. We just don't ever get to spend as much time as we want to there. Directors are always so funny because I tell them I come to rehearsals, and then when I do, they get surprised. They're like, "What are you doing here?" Even David did that at first. He was like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Why am I here?" We team taught a collaboration class with directors and designers together at that point, and we would talk about how you should go to rehearsal. And then when I did, he would be like, "Why are you here?" Like, what's wrong with you?
I'm doing what we're talking about.
Right. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. So I went back and forth for a while, but by my senior year, I'd sort of decided that it was lighting for me. It's just, there's something about the magic of it. There's something about how I love the ephemeral nature of it. I love how it doesn't exist until we are in that room. There's some pros and cons to that, of course, right? Like years ago, I read a thing that Jules Fisher had said, who was this great lighting designer, the grandfather of us all. And he said, the set designer comes up with an idea and they sketch a little sketch and they go, "Oh my God, that sucks." And they crumple it up and throw it away. And the costume designer draws a rendering and goes, "Ugh, that sucks," throws it away. And the lighting designer has to turn all of the lights on in front of every other person. Like we don't get to do any of it alone. And we turn it all on and somebody else gets to say, "Oh, that sucks." Right. There's no privacy in the art form.
Yeah. So you just touched on like the gold mine of what I wanted to talk about in this conversation. How do you, as someone who walks into tech day one, you're like, "All right, guys, let's do this." As every other department's been like, we kind of have an idea of what's happening here. How do you manage, create your creative outlet of, making these lights and testing everything, managing the time that you are allotted in the tech process? What is that balance like?
It's a lot. Managing the tech time of the process, the tech time is always, managing time is tricky. I compare lighting to, it's funny, I don't think of it, people are always like, "Oh, you paint the stage." And I don't think of that as what we do. I think of us as sculptors, not painters. However, I compare lighting design to painting in this way, which is basically that I have to figure out ahead of time what it's going to look like, right? So I make this decision of what it's going to look like, and I do that with my team, and we talk about things, and we think about who the characters are. I'm super all about like, why would the character have this light? What light is in their world? Are the lights in the world of the character things that make sense for them, or are they in a world that is lit differently than they would feel comfortable in? It's like, why does hospitals are great because like they're so uncomfortable. In every play under the sun puts somebody in a hospital at some point. But the lighting in them is we all have such a reaction to lighting in hospitals. And so we just have to think about all of those things, whether it's actually the physics of the world that you and I live in, or it's the physics of a world we create for the characters. I have to figure out what it's going to look like. And then like a painter, I'm going to sit down and I have to get my tools together, right? So I have to get like my brushes and my paint colors. And for me, that's sort of like the different kinds of lighting instruments that I use or the gels that I use. And I put together all of these tools so that I know that on the first day of tech, I can sit down and start to paint that picture, right? And once I see it, things will change, right? I'll be like, oh God, oh no, I'm sorry. That blue does not look good on that costume. We won't be using that blue. We'll change our blues. Or I might be like, oh, I need to do something for this person over here. So I'm going to add this thing. Or we might come up with a whole new idea while we're watching them come together. That first draft might just be, we might come up with new ideas and then we start to add and change and move. And it will look different than I thought it was going to. And it always does. But that's sort of my thing is to be prepared. And then also, so that's one thing, is to be prepared to address all of the things that we think should be the lighting design per se. And then I also want to think about like ahead of time, like, can I cover can the actors go wherever they need to, right? There might be a handful of specials that are contingent on the focus. And people, I really don't like to focus a show before I've seen a run through, and I almost never have in my life. But I really can't. I sort of can do most of it because a lot of it, there has never been a play in the history of time where the director did not walk in the first day of tech and move the furniture. They've been rehearsing with it like that for all of rehearsal. And as soon as they walk in the theater, they move it. So like I teach my students and I don't get precious about those focuses because I'm going to have to change them anyway. Like we're totally prepared. Every electrician in the world knows you're going to refocus the lights on the chairs and the sofas. Like it's just going to happen, or the tables. So but I need to see it in order to be able to cue it. So that's sort of one of the big things. I like to be able to see the show twice if I can. I like to see it all the runs I can, but I like to see it twice for sure so that I can have one run where I'm just experiencing it. So I'm just sort of like feeling all of the things the actors are doing and watching their movements and sort of being an audience member, because from that moment on, I don't get to really be an audience member until the first preview. And even then it takes a while before I can fully give myself back over. And then in the second preview, I'm frantically writing down what the cues are going to be. And one of the things that I try to do, I was taught to do, it's not like I'm special, I really try to put down in the cueing, in my cue sheets, what lights I want to use. Like, I'm like, use the side light, use the blues, so that when I go back and start to craft it, I actually have given myself those notes. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes they say things like the world changes. Great, that's helpful. What the hell do I mean by that, right? But, so that's sort of it. I love when my stage managers give me sort of their tech goals, which generally speaking, I feel like they usually think we're really terrible and they give us worse tech goals than, I was like, we can get to that. What's wrong with you? Especially when it's a new stage. If I have not worked with that stage manager, but I've worked with a director, I find that they always overcompensate for us. But I like that because one of the things that I really rely on the stage manager for is knowing how the room works. Because I still don't know the rhythms of like, what is the dynamic between these two people? Is this director going to need to give a lot of feedback to the actors right now? What is the rehearsal room been like? Because there's a way that really affects the relationship in tech for some directors. Or there's directors who just step back from that and really focus on design and the look of it and push through the show. You know who was the craziest director in the world? I don't mean that as a bad word. In terms of like getting the best tech goals ever was Lisa Evans, Dan Kluger's wife, Dan, the sound designer that we both worked with on the Sound Inside.
Tell me more.
I did Lee right after the Sound Inside, and she had this unbelievable ability to like get us up to the really big, crazy number right at the end of the day. So like we would get to the end of the day and we'd be okay, and we wouldn't have to start that really huge thing, right? And she had goals I thought were unrealistic, and she would get them there because she was in control, right? She also knows, and that's something that I try to think about as a lighting designer, and I try to be in conversation with my stage manager about, is like, what are the things we really need to work, and what are the things that we can come back to? As a lighting designer, there's a lot of we can come back to, because we still have to hang a new light, or there's things that we can't physically do. Projections and sound can build on their computers. So for them, they can do everything in the room. So I think, I don't know, for me at least, I'd say for lighting designers, but maybe it's just me, I don't know. I'm not the rest of them. It's easier for me to say, I don't have to perfect this thing. We know what we're gonna go for. Let's keep moving, and I can bring you a draft the next time we get to this.
That's it's a delicate balance. And I find, especially working with a designer for the first time, I like to sit down and say, okay, what are your big moments that you're thinking of before we even get in the room, which may change. Like you said, like we might throw the whole design out the window day one and be like, all right, well, this is a totally new world that we didn't realize until we stepped in here. But I know for me, at least, when I'm tackling a show, I'm always like, okay, I know that this is the moment that we need to dedicate time to. And I think what you're saying about Lee is such a great tip for stage managers as well, is look at what your big moments are and then plan your day around them. Like at 11, do you really want to start, side by side in company? Like, no, absolutely not. I want to touch on a little more your relationship with stage managers, because I think you just said a bunch of beautiful things that I was like, yes. How, when you start working with a stage manager for the first time, how do you go about building trust? How do you start developing a language with stage managers? Because I feel like we're all speaking English in a room, but the English that you and I are speaking is going to be completely different than the director, and getting us all in like one dictionary is a huge process.
That's totally true. It's so interesting. I think it's different. It's always different depending on on the relationships in the room, if that makes sense. Like it depends on if they know the director. Do I know the director? If I know the director and I've worked with them a lot, people will definitely come to me. And one of the things that gets complicated, like I've definitely had stage managers in the past who have wanted to like be in charge of the room and run the room. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but I know that person and I think I can help you. And okay, if you don't want it, but I promise you, we're going to get a lot further with that particular director if you let me give you some feedback on things that director likes. But I try, for one, I think actually going to rehearsal is really helpful. Being in rehearsal, because then the vocabulary starts there, where it's like there's not a lot of pressure in what's happening with a lighting designer in rehearsal, right? I also try to be appreciative of everything that they give me. Even at times when I'm like, oh my God, this was so funny. We were at first rehearsal. God, was that must have been right at the show I did right after Soundside. I was at first rehearsal for a show at Writers Theater here in Chicago. And the ASM, maybe it was Les Spring. One of the people was talking about, there was we got our folders, right? Like our packets, our first day packets that had like the information, the calendars, whatever. And the assistant stage manager who I knew, I made some comment about them, and I don't remember why she said this, but she said, oh, at least you're not this other lighting designer. He just like, we worked so long on those, and he just took his, last time he was here, he just took his and threw it in the corner. And I was like, she walked away, and I turned to the person next to me, and I was like, so you're telling me I shouldn't tell her that I never look at these again after this day? Like, I don't. I'm not a paper person, but like, I get all that, and I'm like, thank you so much for this. Like, I'm really bad at things like turning in I can never figure out if I'm supposed to tell people like, my allergies, etc. Because like technically I work for someone else, and it's so funny. So like that thing is always weird.
My favorite was there was a moment in Sound Inside where I went, are you allergic to anything? And I don't remember what you said, but you looked at me for a second and I was like, just tell me. I was like, I just need to know.
Maybe I was trying to be cute. Maybe I thought I was trying to come up with something funny. Maybe I was thinking about lights.
We were by the snacks, so I think I was thinking about the snacks, so that might have been it.
I have this thing about snacks. Did I tell you this then? That
Please.
theater companies, there's all these theater companies who like really get proud of their snacks and they're like competitive, like we have the best snacks. I'm always like, cool. Is that really your priority? Like I'm a little judgy of the people who put priority in making tech a comfortable place to be, which I think that's terrible because it's not like I think tech should be awful. But it's sort of like, okay. I also really don't like it when theater companies who don't have much money and don't pay you very well are like, but we brought sandwiches for everybody. And I'm like, could have bought my own sandwich. Give me $10 more. Like, you know, like, come on.
That is very fair. I want to ask, so you touched on you were based in Chicago. I'm a Chicago gal as well. That's how I made Heather be my friend originally. So you also mentioned that what?
So that you did, like you went around, you're like, that was our connection. You and Mary Louise went to the same school, so you knew the same people. Like you're real good at like making those connections.
I've got my in. Don't tell anyone though, because then everyone will do it and I'll have no way to, work. So can you talk about, you've worked with Mr. David Cromer multiple times, and it sounds like you guys have a very strong collaborative bond. How did you go about forming that bond, and how does that collaboration continue through, up to right now?
So that relationship started because I was his bartender. I bartended at the Non-Equity Bar in Chicago 1,000 years ago. And a woman who is not a part of either of our lives anymore was stage managing a show for him. And he was doing a production of Golden Boy. Was that it? He thinks we've known each other a little bit longer than we have. I'm pretty sure it was when he was doing Golden Boy, but it might not have actually been. But it was a morning show at Steppenwolf. So they would, like, it was a kid's show. I don't remember what we called them back then, but for young audiences. And he came into the bar one night with her and we met, and like I'd heard of him. I knew who he was. He was director, and this was the 90s, the mid 90s. I've known him a long time, and like your whole life. And
that's really fair and factual.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a good thing. It's nice to have that. So then I didn't do a show with him for a long time. At one point, we both quit smoking. We both smoked far too many cigarettes in our youth, and we quit at the same time.
That's a bond.
That was a serious bond for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we did our first show together in 2002, something like that. And it was Miracle on 34th Street. David, everybody was broke. We were also broke back then. And David had written this adaptation of it that we did at a place in Chicago on Chicago and Halstead called the Chicago Center for the Performing Arts, which was, I'm pretty sure, heavily connected to the mafia. I don't really remember the guy that ran it. The production, I mean, I do remember him, but like it's so hazy in my head. Our friend production managed it. It starred the little known, you've never heard of this guy. His name is Tracy Letts. As
Can't say I've heard of him.
Yeah, I know. He's not doing very well now. We joke periodically about doing the national tour. The
world needs it right now. Right now.
It's true. It's true. And the last play that I did was David directed Tracy's play Bug that we just did at Steppenwolf. So that relationship and then we taught together. And I think that was incredibly helpful. A few years later, we taught together. We taught this collaboration class at the college, Columbia College Chicago, where I teach still. David taught. He also went to school there, so we both have deep relationships with it. And when I started there, he was my only friend on the faculty. And so we taught this class together. And I think the fact that we talked a lot about making art to people meant when we started to make it, I think that meant we actually had a pretty good conversation. It was easy to talk about it. We'd done a show together before, but it had been a bit. So our relationship as designer director really kicked in 2007, 7. Yeah. And so, we've done a number of shows together that have happened multiple times.
Yeah, please, can you talk about Our Town for a little bit?
Sure. Sure. We did this play called Our Town. You may have heard of that as well. Yeah, that was actually one of the great moments of my life. He was going to do it, and I really wanted to. I actually loved the play Our Town because I had worked on it when I was younger, just out of college, and I thought it was the most amazing play in the world. And now I'm like, I barely freaking knew what it was then. Like, I had no relationship with that play, but what I basically wanted was my own relationship with that play. And David was doing the show with a company called The Hypocrites in Chicago, and I really wanted to do it. And they had a resident lighting designer named Jared Moore, and so Jared got the first offer. And the thing that's interesting is the artistic director of the theater company and I worked together quite a bit outside of the company. So at that point I was doing that artistic director shows all kinds of other places, and Jared was doing his Hypocrites ones. And Jared said no to the show. And Jared and I have a long history. I ultimately took over a show of his that he did. Another long relationship of my life has been these Gilbert Sullivan operettas. And he did the first one. Totally went on a tangent. He did the first one, which was Pirates of Penzance, and then I came in and started making more of them, because he toured a lot at the time, so he was sort of busy. And ultimately, I took over Pirates of Penzance, and I've always been like, oh my god, I owe you everything. But now he's all like on TV, working on TV and doing freaking great. But he said no to that show, and I was so glad that he said no, because then they got to ask me to do it, and David had like this really strong vision for the show of what the final moment was going to be. But we didn't exactly know how we were going to earn that moment, right? We didn't know what everything was. We knew that we didn't want it to be artificial. We feel like the fact that play created an entire, like when he made that play, when he first wrote it, Thornton Wilder, he wanted to like push back against the artificiality of like realism in theater. And in doing so, he made this entirely new style of making theater, which meant that now when we do it, it doesn't strip the artificiality away like it did. So we were trying to figure out, how do you do that again? How do you do that now? And so we did this play, and the first meeting we went to, David was doing, it was a big year. David was doing his production of Adding Machine in New York, and which was beautiful. I flew in to see it.
That's my favorite play of all time. Just
oh my god,
it was out there.
Geez, it was so beautiful. And he was working on that, and also actually his father passed away that year, so that was a big year. And so basically when we did our first meeting, I think rehearsal started 5 days later.
Cool.
And we went to, and I had talked the costume designer into doing it. She wasn't sure if she wanted to do Our Town. I pick projects based on, like, there's the three things, right? There's project, people, money, and you need 2 out of 3 to make it successful. I can't tell you how many times I've done shows with one of those things. But I put more weight in projects and people to some extent. But I put more, so between my friend, this costume designer, and I put more on people, and she puts more on project. So I trust that that the people will steer me right. And that doesn't always work. But I think we've probably both been like shot in the foot by our philosophies the same amount of times. So I did, I had talked to her into doing the show. I swear to God, I knew the set designer before that, but we think we probably really met on that show, but for some reason we feel like we didn't. I see her tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and we can duke that out again. When did we meet? And so we went to this meeting at the executive director of the theater companies, the managing director's house, and David talked about his ideas for the show, and we all sort of had some plans. And by the way, at this point, casting is also like, David's like, we're all calling people. David's like, hey, who do you think might be good for this part? Like, casting was a very weird, David is the best at casting I know, period. And it was this brilliant, amazing cast. But we went out after, is the story. Oh, and the music director, our composer / music director, who also was in the play. And I don't know if you know this, but when we did the play, David was in it as well. Yes. So David played the part of the stage manager, who is the person who sort of is devising this story for the audience. So one of the most, in some ways, artificial things is when you put somebody who's pretending to be the deviser, it makes more sense for it to be the director. The character's called the stage manager. The character really should be called the director.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know?
but it's another layer I can discuss when I con David Cromer into coming into the podcast. So this is great.
No, absolutely. So he was in the show. Our music director was also in the show, and then the other designers. So we went out to this place on Irving Park called Rezzy's Beer Stuba, and it was Jonathan, the music director, and Jonathan, David, and I all taught together. We're very, very close. Jonathan, David, and I. The costume designer I was very close to, but didn't know those guys very well. And David's assistant on the project, who was a woman named Rachel Walsh, who is in Providence, Rhode Island now, who none of us knew. David knew. And so there's this group of us at this restaurant in that sort of like weird, awkward thing where you're getting to know your team a little bit. And we all drank a couple beers and ate some sausages. And then we just started talking about the play, and we just started talking about the characters and who they were and how we felt about them. And David would do these long monologues from the play, which was funny because later we were like, do you remember your lines now? Try them now. See if you know. And it was just this crazy event in our lives. And I remember leaving, and David got a ride home from Rachel. And I remember, I hope I was stopped at like the side of the road, or at very least a stop sign. I must have been at the stoplight at least. And I texted David and I said, that was magic, right? And he wrote back and said, yeah, what was that just happened? Like we recognized that moment when it happened. And it was just so interesting because then this play it took on a life of its own. We were really proud of what we were doing with it. We created this, there's a little bit of the mythology, but like it came out of the basement of this small theater in Chicago. It's like, yeah, but everybody knew what they were doing. We had this brilliant cast. David was brilliant. It was just really fantastic. And it was very successful. And then we remounted it the next fall. It was great. I got to like the people who were like my bosses at work were like contacting me to try to get tickets. I was like, I don't have tenure yet. Yes, yeah, you can have a ticket. I was like, managing director, help a girl out. So then we remounted it that fall, which was a weird experience because it was like in the exact same, like literally the same space, this crazy little basement. And it's funny because we did things like, they're supposed to be on ladders when there's like the old adage, they're like up on the ladders, and we didn't do ladders, and people were always like, oh God, they didn't do ladders. And it's because the room selected. Well, we didn't have room for ladders. Like they would have been on the bottom rung. But like one of them was like 3 feet away from the ceiling. It was, yeah, so that was crazy. And then we ended up doing that show. It got Scott Morphy from Barrow Street, who's the greatest dude in the world, brought us to New York, and with Jean DeMania and Tom Rorschafter. And we ran the show there for 19 months.
With friend of the podcast, Richard Hodge.
Yes, indeed, friend of the podcast, Richard Hodge. So we go to LA. Here's a story for you. We go to LA to do the show. So we did the show in 2009 in New York.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
This is the story I told you, right?
Please tell it.
Oh, okay. So we're in LA. So we did the show in 2009. It runs till September of 2010. And right after that, we realized we figure out we're gonna do the show in LA. Helen Hunt was in the show. Right? We go from the basement of this place in Chicago to like Helen Hunt and God, who else was in it? Well, Mike Shannon, but he only kind of counts because we've all known him since nobody knew who he was. It's just crazy. But so Helen was wanting us to do it in LA. So we go out and check out the theater in like October of 2010. January. It was January. And we then, I always remember sitting backstage. It was me and the set designer. Now we have a different set designer at this point. Our set designers have sort of morphed during this process, but everybody else remained the same. We were sitting backstage. It was me and David and the set designer, Michelle. And we were talking about whether or not we should post on Facebook that we were in LA and be like, come by our hotel and have drinks with us tonight if you want to. And we were like, if we post this, the gossipy people from Grover's Corners, right? All of our cast members are going to be all over this conversation. Like they're going to, we knew what they would do. We knew that we would hear literally nothing. They would go completely silent because they go off the internet and they go into their texts. So we were like, are we willing? Because they're going to know why we're here. There's really no reason for the three of us to be in LA together. Or they're going to guess, at least. So then we didn't do the show there until January of 2012. So it took a bit. So one day we're sitting in rehearsal, or sitting in that rehearsal, in tech rehearsal, and Hodge calls a cue. And I turn to him and I say, no, that's not where that cue goes. And he was like, oh, okay, I thought I went here. And I was like, no, it's for this. We run it again. And I turned to him and I said, yes, okay, thank you. You should put that back where you were calling it. And next time, you should feel free to remind me that you know the show better than I do. Like, who am I to tell him where the cue goes?
Well, can we talk about that for a second? Cue placement, that's such a hot topic issue with designers and stage manager relationships. It sounds like you more err on the side of giving your design to execute by a stage manager. Would that be correct?
Giving I just want to tell them my intention and then let them figure out where, because I'll say it's 10 seconds long and, and then they'll get it wrong and that's fine, but they've got to guess and then we'll figure out together, oh no, that needs to be a little bit earlier, or whatever. But yeah, no, I would rather let them figure it out because they know how long, for instance, like, do I know how long in rehearsal that it took like Mary Louise to like walk between, there's a hilarious example because I love my girl, but she didn't know what to do. She'd mess with, she was super consistent, but like every so often she would clearly change her mind about how she was doing it.
She tried things.
Yeah,
she explored.
Totally. So she'd be like the same, different, always the same, different. I was like, oh. But when I came back to see the show in January, she was still sitting on the floor in the right place, and that's my girl. But yeah, like I don't know how long it takes her to cross. But Hodge would have, because he was in rehearsal, right? Yeah, I really think that my stage managers can lead me better. I get nervous when they're like, but where line does it go on? I'm like, oh no. Because I think so much lighting, more of it is related to movement of bodies in space than what they're saying,
Does this tie into your theory of lighting designer as a sculptor?
I guess, but like it's also like thinking about like I mostly, it depends on what the light is doing, right? Like if it's like a lot of times we're just kind of shifting focus. And if we're trying to quietly shift focus, it's going to be movement related more than anything. The ins and outs of scenes, things like I turn a light on, you turn a light off, those get set on things. But often it's, it's a movement thing. And whether or not that's always on the same line, I don't know. I had a couple years ago, I did a show with a stage manager that I love dearly, dearly. And she did nothing. There was one night I was watching a preview and I was like, God, I could have sworn there was a cue here. This is crazy. And I was taking notes and finally I was like, wait, we're not in the right cue. Like, I just know we're not in the right cue. Because there's no way I don't have any light on up there. And I after the show, and then of course I saw the cue happen. Later, and I was like, oh, she just doesn't know where it is. She doesn't have the right intention for it, or she doesn't know what it's doing. And sure enough, when she took the note on it, like I told her what it was for, and it was like, I'm adding light for him behind it's like one of those things where there's a wall, right? So every time they go to the wall, you got to put a little light on, and then when they leave the wall, you got to turn the light off, because otherwise the wall's the lightest thing on stage, right?
Wall 101.
Oh my God, lighting, basic lighting right there. Turn the light off the walls. And when she took the note on where it went, she tied it to an action that another actor was doing that was like 10 seconds before that. And then we changed that movement. Like, it was like this guy got a puzzle out. She was like, oh, that'll be when the guy gets the puzzle out. And that's the note she took. Oh, God. So then when we moved the puzzle to the next page, she moved the cue with it, which made sense. But
yeah, but it's interesting.
And then I hit her. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a way to learn your mistakes. But that's what you're saying about intention. It's so important to know and talk with your designer about what is the intention for this look and this movement. How do you form your own team, like your assistant's assistant, when you are, hired onto a show? What does that look like for you? And how are you trying to create like equitable teams when you hire?
Well, one of the things it depends on the project where I'm working. I definitely, on smaller projects or things that are not quite so abusive to the schedule of going to college, I try to use students so that they get the opportunity to work with me. And most of them don't stick for long, but usually there's like, I usually one of them starts to become more of my permanent assistant or associate. I definitely think a lot about who's in the room at this, and like who do I want? I think about the team that I'm working on though too. I'll think about, will they get along with this director? Will they learn from this director? I had an assistant this year who I love so much, and and the reason I hired her was because I knew that she had quit her full-time job and was trying to make it as a lighting designer. She was like, I'm going full in for that. And I was like, I think you are too qualified to be my assistant on this, but I know you also need to pay your rent, and I want to know that I can help you do that. I think about what the representation in the room is. I want to lift up rising BIPOC designers. So that is something I consider as well. It depends, it depends on where you are too. Like when you go someplace like Williamstown, you don't choose your people, they're chosen for you. And that's fine too. I mean, I often will, people sometimes write me emails, and this is something that's, when they write me emails and say, oh, I think you're a really great designer, it's pretty clear to me, if they don't comment on the fact that I'm a teacher, a professor, it's pretty clear to me that they didn't do any real research on me, that they just know who I am because I just got noticed somehow. Like there was an announcement of Broadway, or there was, whatever it is. Chris Jones in the Chicago Tribune said something nice about me. Because anybody who's just finishing college and doesn't acknowledge, I mean, I'm probably gonna, if I want somebody who's just out of college, I'm probably gonna take my own student, right?
That would be a fair assumption.
Right. But I get some people who write me and they're like, hey, I know that you have your own students and I know that you're probably gonna use them, but I just wanted to throw my name out. If you're ever looking for somebody, if the people you have are busy or whatever, I just think you're cool, and I'd like to work with you. And that said, all of that, I rarely, the cold call doesn't get it for me. I usually would then like ask my friends, like, hey Keith Parham, who's a good assistant that you've worked with? I like it if my assistant has been at that theater. That's always a good thing. That's really helpful when they know the electrician already. If they're new. But then like when we went to New York with Sound Inside, oh my God, there was just no way I wasn't taking Val and Sardi with me.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how Sound Inside started at Williamstown and then the transition to that was your first Broadway show, correct?
That was my first Broadway show.
And then what was it like on The Great White Way?
So this is interesting. When we did, okay, here's a funny, you'll appreciate the story. David, I don't ask David for work, and we have ebbs and flows. Like we hadn't worked together on a new play in a while, and it's not, sometimes it is personality. Sometimes you're like, I'm tired of that person. Their neediness is one thing, or their tardiness, or like things that just kind of annoy you. And sometimes it's just because you've been around other people, and so you're sort of working with them. So he and I hadn't worked together in a bit, but we'd been talking a bit. And I found out he was doing Next to Normal here in Chicago, and I wanted to do it so badly. And I had done a production of Next to Normal years before, and actually texted him while I was doing it, and was like, I totally wish I were doing yours. Just because he and we do have a very similar aesthetic. We have a point of view that is about the way we look at characters and the worlds that they live in that is similar. And we have I have fun with him. So I texted him and I was like, I never ask you, and I feel awkward because I never do, and we've been friends for so long and I've never done this, but I'd love to do that show. And he wrote me back the next morning and he was like, okay, I got up this morning, I saw your text, and I texted Michael, the artistic director at that theater. He said, and I told him we have to hire Heather to do lights. And he said, that would be great, but we've already hired somebody. Because they'd hired my friend Keith, who also works with David and has every reason to have been hired. And I was like, oh. And in that email or that text or whatever, David said, but you should be hearing from Williamstown. And I'm not going to lie to you. I was like, Williamstown, they pay crap.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to go to friggin' Massachusetts. It's a crazy intensity putting a show up there, right? Like, it's not okay. You're putting up a show that they want to be Broadway ready, and you're doing it on the backs of unpaid interns. And both shows I did were the first show in the space. And both times I was like, they don't even know how to put the ladder up correctly. During the Sound Inside, when we were in Williamstown, I would leave the room. I would go into the electric shop when they were putting the ladders up because I was terrified that they were going to like fall over and kill somebody.
Yeah, and those interns are acting apprentices that are not, maybe have ever touched a ladder in their, college training or wherever they come from. So there's a lot of
The good news is they'll be a better actor because they raised that damn ladder up for me.
There's a lot of systematic problems within that institution that I think they are working on from,
They are.
Yeah.
I actually don't have a problem talking about it because I do think it's important enough to talk about. I also think that we've all had opportunities that talk about keeping power in the same palm, right? Like everything there, like you have to be able to get to there, and then everybody from there, there's that network, that success. And so that really is an issue that they need to be working on. I think they are. So that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So we go to Williamstown, we do the show. Well, then I get the play. I read that play. Do you know, on the plane home from opening, I found and read like the older versions that I had from when Adam first wrote it.
Oh,
and I felt so seen when I read that play. I mean, it is about a middle-aged college professor in a creative field. I mean, it is. But it's also about
you brought it up. You brought it up.
Oh, totally. No. I used to joke all the time. I was like, and I'll be the dramaturg. But, it is like, I mean, it's a play about loneliness. And I think that it's really hard not to feel seen in it because it is so much about loneliness. And I don't care who you are, you're lonely. And I just thought it was the most beautiful play in the world. And I've long been a fan of Adam's. I met Adam actually at the opening of Our Town. And he was so generous to me and the costume designer and so supportive and kind in his unbelievably like Adam way, where he's just like keeps saying the same thing and he's like really into it. It was great. So that was my first Adam experience. So I was so excited to do this play. And then there were other people on the team that I was friends with that I loved. I loved the costume designer from way back. He's my little brother. So that was really fun. So it was fun to do it. And I got Val, and she was my associate, and Austin was my second assistant, really her assistant, on that project. And they were fantastic. She was what I love about Val, who I would keep with me. I would keep her with me for the rest of my life. And there's a woman here that I really love, named Conchita Avatia, who doesn't know it yet, but if she's interested, gets to be my Chicago assistant or whatever. We'll figure it out. But she's just really.
I'll send her the link to this, and then she can make a decision.
She knows I love her. I do text her periodically and just tell her how great she is. But, it's hard with assistants because you don't want to keep them down. You don't want to be the person who didn't let your assistant go be their own designer. But Val is not only like insanely organized, insanely chill, insanely like good at communication. She's also like randomly like the most kind human who I have these like late night, I haven't in a while. I texted her and Connor yesterday and I haven't heard from them. But she was like, we'll text in the middle of the night and she'll like make me feel better about life, So like, she's just a really great person to have next to you all the time. I really love her. And I promised her when we did the show at Williamstown and it was successful and people were loving it, I was like, if this has a future, you're part of that future. So there you go. I was like, you get to feel the pressure of whether or not this show goes to New York too.
Yeah, but that's also, I've found, at least like when I've worked on shows that transfer, you don't know. And there's, especially as a low person on the team, you're one of the first to go if they bring in a different team or whatever. So you saying that, I'm sure, was like a relief off her back, if anything. Like, whatever, the show doesn't go, then I didn't miss anything. But if it does, this person told me I have a job, which...
Because, I mean, for God's sake, like, I was her for years. I did that job for years in my life. And I, was an electrician for a little bit before I started assisting. it's your show too, man. Like it's her show. It's her show as much as it's my show, you know? Once it leaves Adam and comes out to the rest of us, then it's everybody's it's a piece of them.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that my team always knows that I value their input into the design, that I could not create it without them, and that they inspire the choices that I'm making every bit as much as David does, or whoever, or Mary Louise, or Will, or, you know, or Hodge. Like there's just, everybody is so important in how it all comes together. So
yeah. So what was it like then? I've kind of talked about like the wall of Broadway and scaling that wall and then arriving on the other side for the first time. What was that like for you? And most importantly, arriving and seeing my face.
Well, that was the best part. Let's be fair.
Thank you.
How did we get so lucky? No, you were fantastic. I felt really lucky on that. I assisted on a couple of Broadway shows many, many moons ago when I was younger, which was really, actually, that was super fascinating to watch, because the first one I did was a transfer from Steppenwolf. And then the next year I assisted on the original production of Top Dog Underdog that George Wolfe directed. And it's so interesting to watch the dynamics of power on Broadway. I would definitely say that George Wolfe has that game down. I love him. I worked on that show. That show I thought I had a long relationship with, because it was 2.5 years of my life between the first production off Broadway and then by the time we finished the West Coast tour. 2.5 years. That's nothing, it turns out. It is hard. It's hard. People don't want to hire people who haven't worked on Broadway. They don't want to. The producers don't want to. And then you know what you really want to get is a show like this, or a show with someone like David who has some power. We were also lucky that nobody asked to replace us. We weren't, that was highly possible, that at any point they could have said, let's replace, any one of us. I felt relatively comfortable that show was, that I had my best shot at getting an opportunity like that, because it was David, and because lighting is such a big part of that particular show.
Yeah, for anyone who didn't have the pleasure to see it, I'll just verbally describe. It was pretty much a bare stage with a black felt wall in the background, and Heather's lights basically told the whole story of one woman in this void, in this depth, with scenic elements coming in and out. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but it was a lot of sound, projection, and lights working in tandem together, and that was a really cohesive squad.
Well, and I fell in love so deeply with both Dan and Aaron, the sound designer and the projection designer, when we did the show at Williamstown. I am a very friendly person, as are you. I am a community builder, right? I'm also a community builder. So like I create these, it's very normal for my little world to be very close. And for me to make these connections. And so it was also very helpful that both of them had worked more on Broadway than I had. So in terms of like negotiating, because nobody ever tells you how anything, like nobody explains anything to you. It's like, you're like, Val, my favorite part was we didn't have any front of house. We had basically no front of house positions. None of us on any of the drawings for Studio 54. Like I didn't have them on mine, sound didn't have them, projections, which makes sense because we all have the same ones. And like watching Val and Nick and I don't remember who did the sound. I don't remember who did the sound, who did that part of Dan's.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't Beth who was in the room with us.
Yeah.
They were like scouring everybody in New York. They were like the network went out and they were like, who's got a thing? Who's worked at the studio? Who knows what, and watching them put all of that together. I mean, Val was a huge part of that. I had a friend who, before I went, who does big Broadway shows and is very successful, and he's amazing. And he was like, get a Broadway associate. And I said, I don't want a Broadway associate. I want my associate. I want the person who's been in my room with me on the show, who knows the show, who knows the personalities. That's what I want. I was like, we can make the rest of it work. Because it's, at the end of the day, it's still just lights going up. Now, studio is also like a cheater theater because they have their own lights, as opposed to a lot of the theaters where they have to rent everything. So Studio 54 is a little, and also John Wooding, who is the electrician there, is an amazing supportive human.
The best.
So yeah. because at the end of the day, you finally get the job, and then you are just doing, the job is the same. Like, there's a lot of like, who does the paperwork go to? There was no due dates. Nobody gave me due dates. Like, normally they're like, this is when that's due. And I was like, I should probably be, I mean, like, literally we were making the light plot because we were like, one of these days they're going to ask us for it. We just don't want to be stuck. But because we didn't have to do a big shop order and stuff, it was a little different than a lot of Broadway shows. But yeah, it's a real thing. And, and I don't know if I'll ever have another one. There was like a little moment where we thought, but then, COVID hit, and who knows?
Well, it'll be a reset for everyone, which I think is needed, honestly.
I do too. I think I get very frustrated. It's also hard. Here's what's hard. I was thinking about this just today. It's people, one of the things that you hear a lot of people talking about is people who don't want to give up the power. And I get that totally. But the other thing, of course, is this is our income as well. Right. And so that becomes so much more complicated when you're like, I right now can barely, I'm not rich. I don't, even on the Broadway, I can show you the beautiful sofa that I got. It's over there. And that chair. Thank God I bought those before we all had to live in our houses and not go outside for days. But it's interesting to see. So it's got to shake up somehow, because if the producers keep asking the same people to do stuff, we all like money.
We all like living and earning a basic income for the work that we provide. So that feels fair. Heather, I do want to respect your time because we're getting close to our hour mark. Oh. But we could go all night. Do you have a classic, funny, scary, amazing production story that you would like to share?
I was thinking about that earlier, and I was like, what on earth do I have? I mean, of course I do, but I can't think of anything now. Like, I have tons of crazy crap that's happened in my life. I have a sweet story.
Please, yes, tell a sweet one.
One of my favorite, this is how theater works, right? So Our Town is like the Scottish play of emotional things. Like, if you are working on a production of Our Town, everybody, you count every single birth or death or wedding, all of those things are the things that you clock, right? So on a Scottish play, everyone's like, oh, this person got hurt or this bad thing happened. But on Our Town, we clock the emotional things. And when we were doing the show in New York, my father was really ill, and I got called home to say goodbye to him. And he didn't die, although he did a couple of months later, but he didn't die right then. But I got called to, and I don't remember, I must have emailed David and Hodge and told them, because when I got to the theater that day, David knew, when he saw me, we had a little moment. And that night, that show, if you know the show, in the third act, it starts out with the stage manager doing this huge monologue about death. And David would sit in the dark, and they were by this point, all the reviews will always say of that show that the house lights never went out. That's not true at all. It got very, very dark during the second intermission, and you would walk in and it was very dark, and there were just these little spots, tiny little spotlights on each chair, because we used nothing but incandescent light bulbs. We didn't use theatrical lighting in it at all. Oh, wow. And so David would sit on the steps in the front. It was an alley with some added seats here. It was initially an alley. I still think of it that way, even though there were almost always, it became a thrust pretty hardcore. Right. And he was sitting in the thrust part on the steps, and I was sitting next to him with the costume designer next to me, because those were the house seats, and so they would always put us in there. And I suddenly realized David started to do that monologue, and I was sitting next to him as he did that monologue. And I was going home the next day to say goodbye to my father in the hospital. And I just sobbed, the tears just rolled down my face. And the costume designer held my hand, and David was right here.
And he's performing.
And he's performing, he's acting, and he is 100% aware that I am next to him. After the show, we were both oh my God, how do we get through that? That was bad. But to me, is such a powerful memory of having that life connection to a show, to my team. You know, the audience didn't know who I was or what was going on. They just thought I was. A lot of people cry in that play, but it was a very intense moment for me. So
that's beautiful, Heather. I loved hearing that sweet moment with you and Mr. Cromer, and that feels like what we all need during this stressful time that we're in right now. Well, Heather, thank you so much for talking to me today. I learned so much just from getting to hear all your stories, so I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm old, you know. I'm old.
Oh my God.
The one good thing about COVID is I don't have to turn 50 this year now, right? We don't have
Oh, no, it doesn't count.
It does not count.
With that, we have come to the end of episode 5 of the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast. Once again, brought to you by Brass Fasteners. Brass Fasteners. Is this box from 1999? A huge thanks to Heather for sharing her experiences with me, and a huge thanks to you for listening. I am currently on my hero's journey of becoming the Howard Stern of arts education, and we're not even through the exposition phase yet, so stay tuned. Again, if you would like to signal boost or support Dig Deep, their website will be linked in the episode notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your chosen podcast platform. Thanks again for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!